Welcome to the Word for 2022. Today we're in Ezra chapter 8. I once heard the story of a police officer that pulled a woman over, then took her license and her keys back to his car. He had them there for a long time. Finally, he came back to the car, he handed the license back to the woman and her keys, and then he apologized for the misunderstanding. The woman looked at the officer and said, "But I don't understand. What was the misunderstanding?" The police officer said, "Well, I observed how impatient you were in traffic, how you were riding on people's bumpers, and how you were yelling and flailing your arms about. And then finally, you swerved out in front of a car, cutting them off, and then you sped away. I also observed that there was a bumper sticker on your car that said, 'If you love Jesus, then honk.' And I also saw another sign that said, 'Follow me to church.' Well, by the way that you were behaving and acting, I just knew that someone must have stolen this car." I love that story. But it really is true. And it begs the question, do we practice what we preach? Do we walk what we talk? Here in chapter 8, Ezra gives us a glimpse into his heart and into his mind. He begins this chapter by giving an accounting of the people that came back with him from exile. At the end of the chapter, he records and gives an accounting of how trustworthy they were with protecting God's property and how faithful God was at protecting them. But in the very middle of this chapter, in verse 22, Ezra reveals what was taking place in his heart and in his mind. We read in verse 22, Ezra said, "I was ashamed to ask the king for soldiers and horsemen to protect us from enemies on the road, because we had told the king, 'The gracious hand of our God is on anyone who looks to him, but his great anger is against all who forsake him.'" How hypocritical it would have been for Ezra and the people to say, "Well, God is with us, but can you protect us, O king?" The king rightly would have thought, either God is not with you, or your God is unable to protect you. So, if the people really believed what they said about God, then they couldn't ask the king for help. They had to trust God. Therefore, since they did believe what they said, they put their belief into action. Ezra proclaimed a fast, and then all the people humbled themselves and they prayed. And so now Ezra records what took place in verse 23. "So we fasted and petitioned our God about this, and he answered our prayer." They practiced what they preached. They walked in faith, God provided, and God protected. As those that claim the name of Christ, we too must live up to what we say. We must practice what we preach. The question is, does our walk match our talk? Thank you for joining the Word for 2022.